one of the things that came up when I was reading those Malcolm Gladwell books that were really inspirational to me when I was an undergrad, one of the things that he talks about is that something crazy like 70 to 80% of US presidents lost a parent by the age of 16. And they found that this like weird anomaly from a life life instant perspective. And like I also lost a parent by the age of 16.
Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
Today, I have with me Jacqueline Good, who is the founder and CEO of Magnestar Inc. Jacqueline graduated from Western University, Shanghai University, and the International Space University. In her career before launching this startup, Magnestar, she built data architecture solutions for over 45 organizations, led the development of 6 software applications, and was amazing at sales, selling over $10 million in data infrastructure enterprise software. Magnestar's software platform ensures that satellites communicate smoothly even when the skies are crowded. This is a little bit my interpretation of what it does. We'll get her to explain it as well. And since founding the company in December 2021, Jacqueline has grown to a team of 5 people, won Startup Fest 2022, the Satellite 2023 Startup Award, graduated from the Creative Destruction Lab 2023 Space Team, and been accepted to represent Canada as a delegate to the UN International Telecommunication Union. In short, Jacqueline is a tech-savvy leader making waves in the space industry. And we are here to find out how she did that and how she is doing. Welcome to the New Wave of Entrepreneurship podcast, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
I want to start with, how did you launch this company? So did you kind of jump off a proverbial cliff, or was it a series of calculated risks?
I would say it was more a series of calculated risks. I read a lot, and one of the books that, as I was building the company, that I was thinking through was a lot of founders, when they go through this process, they have to be taking calculated risks in order to ensure success. And so one of the things that they do is that they take risks in certain areas, whereas they maintain consistency in certain areas. And that's really how I went about it. So from my standpoint, I knew really from undergrad that I wanted to build a company. And yet I decided to, work for the first 5, 6 years in order to build skill sets that I could then leverage when building a company myself. In doing so, that's where I built software applications, conducted pre-sales, so technical sales, really saw that the end-to-end from a data infrastructure standpoint, as well as a sales standpoint of what that looks like, was trained within data science, data engineering, and really got my bearings. And then from there, decided it was time to actually go ahead, once I had built and launched product, go ahead and build my own. So from that standpoint, I think that I decreased the risks of entrepreneurship by making sure I had a really strong skill set going into it. As well, I thought about it from a financial standpoint, like it is a financial undertaking to build a company like this. I think that some founders and entrepreneurs, the way they do it is that they offset that risk by maintaining their day job and building in the nights and the weekends, which I think is a very feasible option. The option that I decided to take was to let go of my day job because it was pretty intense. And I went through a program called Entrepreneur First. And with that, with an Entrepreneur First, they provided me with sort of a stipend of sorts to build the company. And that way I could pay my bills while also building the company and experimenting with different co-founders, with different folks to build a company. And at the end of that process, ended up founding Magnestar and raised capital associated from graduating from that program initially.
Did you sort of know,
Oh, forward
yeah,
thinking or
did you know that
backwards? Yeah.
especially sort of sales and your experience in data and all of the pieces that made up your career until you launched, it feels so in it feels so intentional, because those are
Yeah.
the things that you absolutely need in order to grow a company. And so just kind of wondering if you chose those roles very specifically in order to get the experience you needed to found this particular company, or if it's kind of in, you sort of knew, and in looking back you realized that those are the things that brought you to where you were.
I think looking back, realized that those were the things I needed to get to the point that I am at today.
Mm.
I think that every step of the way, I took positions that may have been more risky.
Mm.
When I graduated undergrad, I had an opportunity to become a product manager at a financial services firm. And I decided to say no to that. And I decided to go to China instead, which was a risk. It was a really big risk, but it benefited me immensely. And then from there, I think I was just following my passions and curiosities. The reason why in undergrad I focused in psychology and statistics was because I love people and I love math. And when I was in China, I had an opportunity to work for one of the largest technology companies in China, and did an internship there. And when I was doing that work for them, it was all around data, understanding the user habits of how people were using these applications that we had built, picking up on the patterns and deciding what product to build next because of those habits. And so I think it was always really following those threads of curiosity. And
Mhm.
then when I got back to Canada, I was interviewing with a series of different companies, and I had no idea what technical pre-sales was when I first got into it,
Mm.
when I was first interviewing. And the more I learned about it, it was really that bridge between sales and technology. And I could, assist the salesperson. I was working with about 5 different salespeople within this data infrastructure company, but I was the technical lead working through all these different problems, and then I would pull in resources as need be. And I think that those skills built it up so that I knew how to manage customer relationships, and I knew how the sales cycle worked, and I knew how to sell technology, and I knew how to work a whiteboard, and I knew how to do all those things that are really important when selling complex software, like critical infrastructure software. So I think that from those standpoints, I didn't necessarily recognize at the time that I was building the skill sets that would lead me to be an entrepreneur, but in hindsight, it's very evident that those were the skill sets I needed. And I also think that I was at this one event. This was about a year or two before I built the company, and Janet Bannister was talking on stage. And she's like, I think the one really undervalued skill that entrepreneurs of the future will have is technical sales. She's like, we need salespeople to run these companies. And that was also really reassuring to me to know that the skills that I've been building for the past 3 4 years was a great advantage when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, what a gift to have exposure to people who are identifying these things for you. And also incredible that you noticed when you heard them. You know what I mean? When you hear wise words, I often find that over my life, I've heard wisdom. And even if I haven't always been able to understand what it meant, there's certain things that kind of just settled with me, and I would wait. And so kind of until I understood what it meant, something in me knew. And it sounds like you had some really incredible advice and wisdom given to you over the years.
Oh, definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
Jacqueline, growing up, you had some significant kind of risks significant challenges and setbacks. I'm wondering if you would feel comfortable telling us about those and how you ended up taking sort of the path and the journey that you have taken, despite or maybe because of those setbacks.
Mm. Yes, I think that it cues into some of the things I was mentioning about like desirable disabilities.
Mhm.
One of the things that came up when I was reading those Malcolm Gladwell books that were really inspirational to me when I was an undergrad. One of the things that he talks about is that something crazy, like 70 to 80% of US presidents lost a parent by the age of 16. And they found that this like weird anomaly, from a life life instant perspective. um, and like I had also lost a parent by the age of 16. And I think that in some way, one of the quotes that he says is like, when parents have the courage to die, children have the courage to live. And it's slightly like, I don't know what the right word is, but it's almost chilling in some ways.
Mhm.
But at the same time, when I was reading that, it was like, it's very true. Like life is very short. And I think that like my mom died when she was quite young. And so from my perspective, like this could all end at any time. And so I might as well give it my all. I might as well go after my dreams. I might as well do anything I can to make my life as interesting and as meaningful as possible, because I understood and I experienced death at a young age.
Hmm.
And so for those reasons, it really pushed me to want to do more in my life.
Hmm. And did
Um,
you feel that
yeah.
way? What was reading that from Malcolm Gladwell? Was that what kind of turned the framing in your brain around? Because for sure you wouldn't have thought that at the time.
Definitely, definitely. No, I saw it as a very large disadvantage
Yeah.
at the time, especially when it happened in high school. I felt like I kind of went on like default mode.
Mm.
Like I was quite shut off. And I was like, I just need to get through high school. I need to get into university. I really went into that like default settings. And I think that when I started reading his books and recognizing that it was actually a huge advantage, um, having gone through that, having survived that. And even when I've been going through the process of building Magnestar, and there's been some very challenging times as we've built the company, I have continuously fallen back on the fact that, I've been through worse than this.
Mm.
I've been through worse than this. I know I can get through this, and I know I have the strength to get through that,
Mm.
whatever the challenge is. And so, for those reasons, I think that it has accelerated the company as well, and has made me more resilient as an entrepreneur
Mhm.
because I know I've overcome really challenging things.
Tell me more about the desirable disabilities. It's something that I've been looking into for my own reasons and very fascinated by the research that's being done showing that there are certain mental illnesses as well that that researchers believe are critical to our acceleration as a species and our evolve the way we've evolved, partly because although it is very difficult for the person living with some of these mental illnesses, it some of them create a mind that is more creative and thinks very differently from the average human. And because of that, it enables us to grow in ways that we might not otherwise have done. And I find this fascinating because that is not an angle that we hear very often. So I would love it if you could share us what you've learned about desirable disabilities from your perspective and maybe how it felt before you understood that and after.
So, from my experience, one of the things that came up when I was growing up, I was diagnosed with dyslexia quite late, in about grade 8, I think it was. And I remember when I was going through those interviews and the testing, um, the language specialist or the specialist that I was working with under that process mentioned that like I had some of the highest coping skills that she'd ever seen, and that I had built out these coping mechanisms within my mind to block and to hide this disability. And I think that from my perspective, what happened was like when I was growing up in Toronto, it was all in English. And then when I moved to Montreal, everything turned to French. And that's when all of my coping mechanisms broke down. And that's when it became much more evident that I was having these troubles and these struggles with language and with reading. And thankfully, I think that what it really comes down to, though, and this is what we learn about in psychology as well, is that it all comes down to risk and protective factors. So risk factors being, undiagnosed dyslexia, moving cities, moving schools, changing languages, like those would be considered risk factors. And yet protective factors would be the fact that my school picked up on this, that they had an assistance program built into the school,
Mm.
and that my parents were able to afford tutoring, and
Mm.
that I went through extensive tutoring as a 14-year-old to relearn how to read.
Wow.
And for those reasons, like I read about 22 books last year. I read quite extensively now. But to your point, like because I had that growing up at a very young age, it did bring up my auditory skills to be much stronger because I was unable to rely on the reading material as much. And that's what people, and that's what's been documented, at least within Gladwell's work, is that those individuals tend to have to overcompensate in certain areas, which develops the skill sets around auditory skills, around people skills, around all these other facets, which are really important in entrepreneurship. And that people with dyslexia are far more prone to be successful entrepreneurs. And so
Wow.
yeah, I do think it comes down though, and it's a little scary in his book. He talks about like how they either end up very successful entrepreneurs or they end up like in prison systems, like that it
Wow.
tends to go one way or the other. And it really comes down to how many risk factors do you have? How many protective factors do you have? And can you increase the number of protective factors to ensure that you end up on one side of that bench? And I
Mm.
think that's when I recognized that, I really honed in on, okay, I recognize that I have specific skill sets associated with growing up with this. How do I lean into my protective factors and increase the number of protective factors that I have to ensure that I end up pursuing potentially responsible entrepreneurship and doing well at it?
It's incredible. That is so fascinating and formidable that you are able to do that. And thank you for sharing because I think that sometimes it's definitely through talking about these things that people can understand themselves better. And so I hope that for our listeners, this is really helpful. As we know, there are so many undiagnosed setbacks and issues and disabilities and mental illnesses out there. And so I really appreciate that, Jacqueline.
Yeah, I do think,
Um,
to what you had said,
yeah,
Gina, I do think that it is really perspective, though.
yeah.
Like, it's really perspective. I think that if you see it as a disadvantage, and to your point, like, it really was reading that literature that gave me the mental shift to be
Mm,
like, oh, this can be an advantage.
yeah.
How do I use this as an advantage?
It
And I
reminds
think
me of
that
all the
change in
superhero
perspective is really
stories.
important.
Yeah,
Pardon?
a lot of the superhero stories, it starts with a disadvantage, right? Or it starts with something.
Yeah,
It's so interesting that they, I mean, in a way, are picking up on that. Um, Jacqueline, when you were thinking about Magnestar and you were identifying, I mean, we sort of touched on this, but how did you decide that this was the concept you were going to go with, and this was the thing that you? How did you know what the need was?
absolutely. We interviewed.
Mhm.
I spoke to 35 operators within the first 3 or 4 months when I was going through the entrepreneurship program. So it was like I was interviewing and reaching out to as many people as possible. Um, and adjacent to that, when I was interviewing them, it was okay, what are the largest issues in space? And how do I pick up on the patterns of what these folks are really struggling with? And what we heard over and over again was signal interference, the coordination process being an immensely painful process for coordinating spectrum, and post coordination monitoring to ensure consistent availability of service. And so we honed in on those three. And I think that when I was hearing about the problem over and over again, because of my background in data infrastructure and advanced analytics, I understood that we could solve, build out a simulation engine that I knew was possible to build, that would map and monitor the signal pathways that space agencies operators who are using like telecommunication services, financial services, GPS, whatever it might be, whatever they were using, that we can map and monitor those systems from a spectrum perspective, and then also look at the business processes on either side of that to create some really great value add on the efficiency side. We just noted that the more we heard about it over and over again, that it was a real problem that needed to be solved in the space sector, and that we had the skill set to solve that problem in a meaningful way. And I think we also had the ambition to solve it. A lot of the time when I chat with space folks about what we're doing, the first things that we hear are, "Wow, that really needs to be solved. Thank you so much for doing that." And the second thing I hear is like, "Thank you for having the courage to do this," because not a lot of people go after this problem because it's so tricky. So I
Mhm.
think that having like the courage and the ambition to go after it as well was a big part of that.
Do you find it hard to find staff who do the staff have to have that same level of grit and ambition? And do you find that difficult?
I would say that with my first hire, Michael, I selected him partially because I knew that he had the skill set, the understanding, but also I knew that he could overcome challenges and he had the resiliency to
Mm,
see this through. I think that was a really great first hire for us. Um, And I think that over time we built upon that, and we de-risked the business as we raised capital and all the rest of it. So it made it a little bit less risky, but we maintained that ethos at the core that, we know this is a very challenging problem. I think that it offsets because every time that we show somebody the technology, they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Like, when can we get access to this?" Like, we get really positive responses whenever we show the technology off.
mm,
So for those reasons, I think it sort of offsets the challenges that we have on a day-to-day basis about building, about making those tough design decisions and all the rest of it.
beautiful. And Jacqueline, can you describe what is the sales model? Like, what are they buying, and how does it work?
So they're buying software as a service. We provide the software to them. Within that software, they can run spectrum simulations. So they can basically look at their satellite constellation compared to other satellite constellations and assess when they will interfere with each other's signals,
Mm,
or when they would have intermittent outages within their service.
mm,
And we built in the business processes around, every 2 weeks, new spectrum filings are being released. So within the software, we pull those new spectrum filings, we assess which ones will overlap, we notify the operators of new constellations that potentially will interfere with theirs.
mm,
We run the spectrum simulations to assess how they will interfere with each other and over which regions. We built in the radio regulations. So
mm,
there are specific radio regulations that have to be followed. We built those into the software so we can ensure that as they're running the spectrum simulations, they are adhering to those radio regulations.
mm,
And we built in the function that once they complete coordination, if they have to complete coordination in instances to enter new markets.
mhm,
So, for instance, if I'm an operator and I want to provide service to Brazil, I have to coordinate with all the Brazilian entities or current operators that are providing service there. And so they have to complete those coordinations. And so we built in the function for them to complete the coordination and notify the national regulator to expedite the process and get them faster access to new markets.
Mm, fascinating.
Yeah.
You were mentioning that people want access as soon as they understand what you're doing, they want it. I also know that you recently got married. And so I want to ask you about, which congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about how do you decide what to say yes to and what to say no to in order to maintain or some level of life outside of it. Also, maybe maintain the growth speed at which you want to grow. How do you think about growth and your sort of life as a human?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's been a real learning curve for me, I would say, specifically because when I was working in China and when I came back and I was working for the company in Palo Alto and then working for the pension fund, I had been very used to working extensive hours and really just giving it all the time that it needs. I would also say that I really enjoy working. I love working. I love accomplishing things. And I think that's very normal for people. Like once you get on a train of like you are accomplishing things and it feels fantastic, you just want to accomplish more. And I think that there is balance. And I think that I was learning a lot of that balance last year. I read a number of books on stress management last year, and that was really helpful as well. But I think that within our company, whenever we work for a weekend in preparation of for a really important meeting, or I know the team has like been pushing on all cylinders for 2-3 weeks.
Mhm.
We give an extra day off. We
Mhm.
tell them, take an extra day whenever folks are feeling that way. I think we're really flexible about that. I grew up and I think I've thrived the most in work cultures that have flexibility.
Mhm.
And so we provide that flexibility to the staff as well as myself. And so whenever I need extra time, I take that time. Whenever, if I'm on a business trip and I'm feeling like I'm willing to come home, I'll come home. Like I think I just don't really overthink it. I think I just follow what my intuition is telling me in terms of what I need to do to take care of myself the most.
Mhm.
And fortunately, my partner, he also works very hard and he works remotely primarily. And so when I'm traveling, he often comes with me, which makes it really fun and makes it easier. And I think that we always just find time with each other. And we also do sports together.
Oh, amazing.
So at least I know like one weeknight a week, we have like a sporting event that we're doing together, which is frisbee. And it's like the randomest sport to me.
I know.
It's just like
Fun though.
really fun and light
Mhm.
and like gets you outside and running and
Yeah.
it's a great thing for us to do together. And one of the things that I learned when I was studying relationship psychology is that in order to maintain long-term relationships, the best thing you can do is continuously have new hobbies together. So as you
Mm.
grow, having new hobbies, creating new hobbies for you to do with your partner is one of the best ways to maintain
Mm.
a healthy long-term relationship. And so I think that I just always think about that when I'm thinking about new things that I'm doing and involving him in those every step of the way.
I love that. I've read that as well. That the times we feel most kind of interested or attracted to our person is when we see them in a different light than we normally
Mm.
do. And so I think that's probably related. You see them in this different way, climbing a rock wall all of a sudden, or interacting with new people in a different way, or whatever it is. I think that's fantastic and fascinating. I appreciate that. In terms of, I'm interested in how you secured funding for Magnestar and how you continue to, and any kind of advice that you might give to entrepreneurs about how to think about that, or maybe tips that helped you along the way, or mindsets that helped you along the way.
Absolutely. So the way that we secured funding in the first instance, we went through the entrepreneur first process. With an entrepreneur first, after 3 months, you pitch to an investment committee, and that pitch, depending if they decide to invest, then it's about 100 to 125,000, or they let you go. So that was sort of the first bucket of cash that we brought in. That's also how I de-risked it for myself. I think that I would have had a lot more challenges building this with like no capital,
Mhm.
because the tech is very like it is deep tech, even though it's software, like it's very comprehensive technology to be built. So I think it'd be really challenging to do without capital. how we raised the rest of our capital thus far has been us, or myself specifically, going and pitching at pitching competitions and winning them. Um, so I think that has been one of the biggest drivers. I think that I have the capacity to communicate what we're doing in a meaningful way. This touches humans' lives. Every time you get on a phone call, every time you take an Uber, every time that you use your credit card, it's using space technology. And especially as defense issues have come into the forefront over the last 2 to 3 years, that defense technology also runs through space, and the criticality of space infrastructure is ever more relevant. So then that for those perspectives, we have a really good narrative of why this is critical infrastructure and critical technology that needs to be built. And we secured funding through me going through Startup Fest in Montreal. And we won Startup Fest in 2022, as Ben mentioned. And with that, we leveraged that momentum to continue to build to our first round of capital that we closed. And from that perspective, I think the other thing I did as well, which was really helpful and what we were taught to do in Entrepreneur First, was to make a list of all the investors. I think that's very common practice that's taught, is like make a list of every single investor, categorize them. You want like a big sheet of all those folks you want to talk to. And fortunately for me, the space sector is very small. And we were at space events on a recurring basis. From a people perspective, like everyone kind of knows each other. And I would just look for those name tags and find the folks that I had on my list. And then I would find reasons to queue in and talk to them and get in Ubers with them and pitch them wherever I could. So those long-term relationships have really helped. We went from completing Entrepreneur First. We then applied for just a bit of like how we built as well. So we completed Entrepreneur First. I ended up hiring 3 interns from Waterloo to help build out the software so that we could apply for the Creative Destruction Lab. And we went through, applied for the Creative Destruction Lab, was sort of like version 1 of the technology we had built. We got in off version 1, which was fantastic. Went through their process, ended up hiring a really strong senior software engineer. He rebuilt much of the technology as well, got us that version 2. And then we raised capital and continued to go from there. But once we got into the Creative Destruction Lab, I just continuously went into these different programs and applied for different things to increase our network, because I find that the more people that are engaged with the success of the company, the higher likelihood of success. You want people to be involved in your process. And that's the way that we went about it, was really to reach out, be as a part of as many programs as possible. They do take time. Yeah. But also like part of the reason I think that we've been successful is because I've had the energy to build this. I think that, I was on the road 28 weeks last year. It's a lot of travel. It's a lot of commitment. And from an energy perspective, you really have to have that. But I think that those are the main ways that we have that we raised capital initially. We've continued to raise capital. And then also just leveraging the grant and subsidiary programs that are available in our instances in Canada, but whatever country that you may be in. Leveraging those opportunities and leveraging those programs that are available and making sure you're staying on top of them.
Would you ever delegate that role, or do you believe it needs to be the CEO that does that? Is that critical to the success that does that fundraising?
I think the CEO is critical to the success for the fundraising. I think that you can delegate it, but the CEO is still always involved. So hiring something on the operation side or helping specifically to get the fundraising off the ground, to do the reach outs, to do initial meetings, those types of things. But it always comes down because they're investing in the chief executive officer to run the company. So that's the most critical aspect, I think, for the investor as well.
What's your ambition with this company, Jacqueline?
Oh my ambitions with this company. I think that part of the reason I got into the space sector is because I have a desire to go to space. I have a desire to see other planets in my lifetime, from more than just a telescope. So I think that, like, I would say the sky's the limit, but almost like beyond the skies are the limit. I think that we have really great benchmark technology that we've built, and now it's just a matter of fueling and working through some more ambitious projects that will get us, deeper into space exploration, as that's where I can see us going as well. I think that to me, increasing the resiliency of space infrastructure was the first thing that we want to tackle, specifically on the signal side, making sure there's clear, consistent communications between Earth and space, making sure that space technology is consistently available. That's what we want to tackle first. And we wanted to leverage that to drive some more ambitious projects that we want to work through as well.
Ooh, that sounds so exciting. I did not expect you to say that, and I love that answer. I want to come. Okay, the last question I want to ask you is how would you describe your experience as a female founder in a pretty male dominated industry of space tech?
Yeah, I think that it leads into some of the things that we were discussing originally about like risk factors, protective factors, or leaning into advantages. And I think that if I was to see, like, I think that it's a massive opportunity being a female founder. I think that I stand out much more. I think that there's only a handful of us, and maybe that's like from an executive perspective. There's a lot of executives that are female in the space sector, which is fantastic. CEOs of other space companies, large space companies. Gwen Shotwell, president of SpaceX, and has been for the last 20 years. Like it's quite phenomenal what she's been able to accomplish, and seeing that firsthand, it's absolutely phenomenal. I have so much respect for what she's done, and I think that for me, being a female founder, I just see it largely actually as an advantage. And I try to lean into that. There are instances, of course, where I experience sexism and I experience um, uh, I question, like, did that just happen because
Yeah.
I'm a female, or
Mm,
would I be treated that way if I was a male? I have those things in the back of my mind, but I think that I have to get over them really fast,
mm,
because I have no intention of, I am a lady, so I have to lean into that as much as I can. And I think that in any instances, just using the advantages that you have at your disposal as an entrepreneur is really important, and maintaining high ethical standards. Like, I think that we always treat people the way that we want to be treated, and you never know where anybody's going to end up. So being kind to everybody along the way and treating everybody with respect, especially in the space sector is very merit based. If you bring an interesting perspective, if you have novel ideas, there are very complex challenges that we have to solve in the space sector. And so if you're able to think about things more uniquely, like, all the power to you. Like, I think that there's, because the challenges that we're facing are so challenging, and because it takes a special skill set in order to solve those challenges, it's less about what you look like and it's much more about what you can do.
mm.
And I think I chose that very, very clearly. And that's part of the reason I also moved away from the financial sector, um, was because of some of the things that I experienced there, and as well as the data sector. And so I decided to move into space because it was much more merit based, and because I knew I could use my intellect and my ideas, to fuel growth.
Mm, interesting. And are you sort of saying that you are more able to control the ethical standards under which you were working or with which you work
Yeah,
in
I
the
think so.
space
I think
sector
that
generally, or because you started your own company or both?
I think it's more because I started my own company.
Uh-huh.
I think that I really wanted to create when I first started as well, I was like, I want to create a safe place for women to work.
Mm,
Um, there's a large, and it's noted at some of the space conferences that I've been to, that there's this odd trend where women tend to work in the space sector for 2 to 3 years as engineers, and then they leave,
mhm,
and nobody knows why they're leaving. But it's this like mass exodus of female entrepreneurs, or female engineers in the
mm,
space sector that experience this. Um, there's not necessarily data that's being collected on why this is happening, but it is a trend that's being noted across the board. Um, and I think about some of the things that I experienced as a woman in tech early in my career, that definitely deferred me or made me want to change companies. And I can understand where some of those women might be experiencing, and it has been documented at large space companies, the type of discrimination or harassment that's occurring.
mm.
Um, and so I think that even in building this company and being an executive in the space sector, it is a large goal of mine to ensure that we have safe spaces, or healthy places for everyone to work, feel respected, feel valued, all those good things.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. I hope that you are, once you have time, able to spend time speaking at entrepreneurial kind of conferences or events for young people, because I just think you're such an incredible role model for young entrepreneurs in the way that you think, the ideas that you have, the way that you've gone about building your career. Um, just really helpful and intentional. And I thank you so much for this interview, Jacqueline. It's just been rich, full of beautiful ideas and incredible thoughts that you've shared. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you. That was great. I I don't think I've ever been this open on an interview before, so or asked those questions. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some more details about my story, and hopefully it inspires others to build as well. It's being an entrepreneur is one of the most fulfilling things that you can do, and one of the most critical things that you can do for your own career. Um, it really it really helps you grow, and I would also say like through struggle comes growth. So
Mm.
just making sure that you're getting through those tough points, because it is really gratifying when what you've seen build is being used and is working, and that's really exciting. So just getting to that point and pushing through some of the hard times, because it does work.
Yeah, that's super inspirational. And I can't wait to, we will follow you. I can't wait to see what you do with your company and you do next. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.